It all started with one denied flight. When General Marcus J. Caldwell, a decorated war hero, was refused service on a routine airline trip, it seemed like an act of discrimination. But what if it was something far more dangerous? What if it was part of a hidden operation designed to track, control, and silence certain individuals? What began as a simple confrontation at an airport quickly spiraled into a nationwide conspiracy, one that reached into the highest levels of power. A private security firm, secret government contracts, and a system built on surveillance and control. And when Caldwell pushed back, are you ready? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And before we dive in, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a story like this. General Marcus J. Caldwell was a man who had seen it all. Wars fought in distant lands, classified operations buried under layers of secrecy, and enemies who whispered his name with a mix of fear and respect. Yet today, in the heart of his own country, the battle he never expected was unfolding at the check-in counter of an international airline. The airport bustled with the usual controlled chaos, families hugging goodbye, business people rushing through security, and the steady hum of announcements filling the air. Caldwell adjusted his military cap and stepped forward, handing his first-class boarding pass to the flight attendant at the gate. The woman, a young blonde with a polished smile, glanced at his ticket before her expression hardened. "I'm sorry, sir," she said curtly, "but we can't accommodate you on this flight." Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." "There's been a change," she said, her voice cold. "It's company policy." He had dealt with enough bureaucratic nonsense to know when something smelled off. "Company policy," he repeated slowly. "What kind of policy refuses service to a paying customer?" The woman hesitated, then spoke more firmly. "Sir, I don't have to explain it to you. Please step aside." A murmur spread among the other passengers. One man sitting nearby leaned in and whispered, "Do you even know who that is?" The flight attendant scoffed, shaking her head. "Just another old guy in a uniform." That was when everything changed. A sharp beep echoed through the terminal as the plane's intercom system crackled to life. "Attention, all crew members. Be advised, we have a high-profile government official being denied service. Immediate review required." The announcement sent a ripple of confusion through the crowd. The gate agent paled, clearly unprepared for the sudden escalation. Before anyone could react, the cockpit door of the aircraft swung open. A co-pilot rushed out, scanning the crowd with urgency. His eyes locked onto Caldwell, and his face drained of color. With rigid posture, he snapped to attention and saluted. "Sir." Caldwell narrowed his eyes. "You know who I am." The young pilot swallowed hard. "Yes, General. And if they're refusing you service, something's very, very wrong." That was when the murmurs turned into a storm. A woman in her 60s, dressed in civilian clothes but carrying herself with military discipline, stepped forward. Without a word, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver badge. She placed it firmly on the counter. "I served under him," she said, her voice sharp as steel. "This man has led some of the most classified and critical operations this country has ever seen. And you're telling me he doesn't have a right to board this plane?" More passengers rose from their seats. One after another, they moved toward Caldwell not as civilians, but as soldiers recognizing their commanding officer. "General Caldwell saved my unit in Fallujah. This man trained me at West Point. He's a legend in the service." One by one, the voices rose, transforming into a powerful wave of defiance. The flight attendant fumbled for words. "I am just following orders," but before she could finish, a uniformed TSA officer rushed onto the scene. He leaned in close, whispering something into her ear. The woman stiffened, her eyes darting toward Caldwell with something new fear. The TSA agent then turned to Caldwell. His voice was low, urgent. "Sir, you need to know this isn't just about you. There's more going on here than you think." Caldwell's expression didn't change, but inside, the gears of a strategist began turning. He had walked into an airport expecting an ordinary flight. Now, he had stepped into something far more dangerous. And someone somewhere was watching. A storm was brewing, and General Marcus J. Caldwell could feel it in his bones. Years of military service had sharpened his instincts, and right now they were screaming at him. Something bigger is at play. The TSA officer's warning still rang in his ears. This isn't just about you. There's more going on here than you think. He studied the faces around him, passengers who had served under him, a co-pilot who looked like he had just seen a ghost, and a flight attendant who now realized she had made a grave mistake. Caldwell took a deep breath and turned to the gate agent. "I want to speak to your supervisor. Right now." Before she could respond, a sharp ding echoed from his phone. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. An unknown number. A text message. "Don't board this plane. It's compromised. They're watching." His jaw tightened. This wasn't paranoia. This was a warning. He had spent decades in intelligence and special operations. He had seen this kind of message before, coded, urgent, and from someone on the inside. His eyes flicked back to the TSA officer, who was now speaking in hushed tones with a security team nearby. Caldwell made his way toward him. "You said this isn't just about me," Caldwell said, keeping his voice even. "What do you know?" The officer hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. "I can't say much here." "But sir, this isn't the first time someone has been." He cut himself off, lowering his voice. "Look, just don't drink anything they serve you on board." Caldwell's stomach turned. What was happening on this flight? Before he could press further, a commotion erupted near the boarding area. A group of passengers suddenly stood up. At first, they looked like ordinary travelers, until Caldwell noticed how they carried themselves. Their postures were too disciplined, their movements too coordinated. One of them, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, took a step forward and locked eyes with Caldwell. Then he saluted. Not a casual gesture, a formal military salute. Caldwell immediately recognized it, the salute reserved for commanding officers. One by one, more passengers stood up, each one offering the same sign of respect. Some were men, others women, but they all had one thing in common. They had served under him, and they weren't about to let their general be disrespected. A murmur ran through the airport as onlookers watched in confusion. The gate agent, visibly shaken, grabbed her radio. "I need a supervisor at gate 42. Now." A voice behind Caldwell spoke up. "Sir, we're not letting this stand. You will board this plane." Caldwell turned to see the elderly woman who had shown her military badge earlier. Her eyes were sharp, unwavering. "We have your back, General." Before Caldwell could respond, a loud chime rang from the airport's PA system. "Attention! An internal security alert has been issued for Flight 209. All personnel remain at your stations." The tension in the air thickened. The flight crew exchanged uneasy glances. Passengers whispered among themselves. Then, out of nowhere, a file attachment appeared on Caldwell's phone. Another anonymous message. "Open this." Now, he tapped it. A document loaded a leaked internal email from the airline's upper management. Caldwell's pulse quickened as he read. Subject: Passenger removal policy priority. Internal use only details. Effective immediately. Select passengers will be reassigned from first-class seating based on specific internal guidelines. This includes passengers who may be deemed problematic for operational reasons. Implementation: Flight crews will receive a list of flagged individuals. If questioned, cite policy. And avoid detailed explanations. Caldwell exhaled slowly, feeling a fire ignite in his chest. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. His removal from first class had nothing to do with policy. It had everything to do with who he was. He looked up, scanning the terminal, and realized something chilling. Several other passengers of color had also been reassigned. The elderly woman next to him leaned in. "Sir," she whispered, her voice tight with controlled anger, "this is bigger than just one flight." Caldwell nodded. "We're dealing with a systemic operation." And now it was time to fight back. General Marcus J. Caldwell stood still for a moment, gripping his phone tightly. The leaked email on his screen was damning proof this wasn't just an isolated case of discrimination. It was a coordinated effort. The airport's overhead speakers repeated the security alert for Flight 209, confirming what Caldwell already knew. Someone behind the scenes was pulling the strings. He turned to the elderly woman, the former soldier, who had stood by him. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Sergeant First Class Evelyn Carter, retired," she said, standing at attention. 40 years of service, sir." Caldwell nodded in respect. "You recognize this kind of operation?" She exhaled sharply. "I've seen it before. Segregation dressed up as company policy. They're testing how much they can get away with before someone fights back." Caldwell scanned the terminal. More passengers were whispering, murmuring about what was happening. But something else caught his attention, a man in a navy blue suit standing near the check-in desk, speaking urgently into his phone. Caldwell recognized the stance immediately. Corporate. Senior level. Damage control. He turned back to Evelyn. "I need a favor." "Anything, sir." "Can you rally the others?" He gestured to the group of passengers who had stood up for him earlier. "We need to make this public before they bury it." She smiled. "With pleasure." As Evelyn moved, gathering allies, Caldwell took a deep breath and approached the suited man. "Excuse me," Caldwell said, keeping his voice steady. The man looked up, his phone still pressed to his ear. His expression flickered a moment of recognition, then unease. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Caldwell glanced at the man's airport ID badge clipped to his belt. "Robert Hayes, Senior Operations Manager." "Seems like there's been a mistake," Caldwell said, tilting his phone just enough for Hayes to see the leaked email on his screen. Hayes's face paled. His grip on his phone tightened. "Where did you get that?" Caldwell ignored the question. "This email suggests certain passengers were deliberately removed from first class." His voice remained calm, but there was steel behind it. "I'd like to know why." Hayes hesitated. That's an internal document. You shouldn't even have access to that." Caldwell took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You're not answering my question." Hayes swallowed hard. "Look, General, you know who I am," Caldwell said, reading the fear in the man's eyes. "Good. Then you also know I don't take orders from middle management." Hayes flinched at the insult, but before he could respond, a new voice entered the conversation. "I think that's enough, gentlemen." A woman in a gray business suit stepped forward. Her posture was confident, her expression unreadable. Unlike Hayes, she didn't seem rattled, she seemed prepared. Caldwell turned to her, already assessing. Mid-40s. Sharp gaze. No visible rank insignia, but an air of authority. "And you are?" he asked. She pulled out a badge. "Corporate Security Division. My name is Laura Mitchell. I oversee compliance for the airline," she said smoothly. "And I'd like to resolve the situation as quickly as possible." Caldwell crossed his arms. "Then let's start with the truth." She smiled. Too controlled. Too polished. "General, I assure you, this is a misunderstanding." Caldwell held up his phone. "This email suggests otherwise." Mitchell didn't even flinch. Instead, she reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her own phone. A few taps later, Caldwell's screen flickered, the email vanished. He blinked. Mitchell smiled again. "That document was classified. It's been recalled." Caldwell clenched his jaw. They had just erased the evidence. But they had made a mistake, because Caldwell had already forwarded the email to someone else. Mitchell's expression shifted ever so slightly, as if sensing his defiance. "General, why don't we step aside and discuss this privately?" Before Caldwell could respond, Evelyn Carter's voice boomed across the terminal. "This is an act of discrimination," she declared, standing with a group of former soldiers now gathered behind her. "We have proof. This airline is targeting passengers based on race." Passengers in the terminal turned, watching, recording. Mitchell's expression finally cracked. A flicker of panic flashed across her face. Caldwell smirked. "Checkmate." He turned back to her. "I don't think I'll be needing that private discussion after all." Mitchell straightened her blazer, masking her frustration. "General, you're making this bigger than it needs to be." Caldwell's voice was calm but firm. "No, you made this bigger. I'm just making sure the world sees it." A sudden chime echoed through the terminal, an airport-wide announcement. Attention! Flight 209 is now under review. All boarding has been temporarily suspended. The crowd gasped. Mitchell's jaw tightened. And Caldwell? He just smiled. Because this was far from over. The airport terminal buzzed with tension. The boarding suspension announcement had turned what was once a simple dispute into a full-scale public confrontation. People whispered, cameras recorded, and the airline's corporate operatives were suddenly on the defensive. General Marcus J. Caldwell stood his ground, his eyes locked onto Laura Mitchell, the airline's corporate security division officer. "You wanted to resolve this quietly," Caldwell said, voice steady. "Seems like that's no longer an option." Mitchell took a slow breath, regaining her composure. "General, you have no idea what you're stepping into." Caldwell smirked. "Enlighten me." Before she could respond, Caldwell's phone buzzed in his pocket. Another unknown number. Another message. "Meet me near gate 45. We need to talk. You're in danger." Caldwell's instinct sharpened. Whoever was sending these warnings wasn't just watching, they were involved. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned to Evelyn Carter and the group of former soldiers. "Hold the line here," he said. "I need to check something." Evelyn nodded, her eyes scanning the crowd like the trained soldier she was. "Go. We've got your 6. Caldwell moved through the terminal, his years of military training keeping his steps measured and purposeful. He approached gate 45, eyes sweeping the area for anything out of place. That's when he saw him. A man in his early 40s, dressed in civilian clothes, but standing with military precision. Short cropped hair, scar above his left eyebrow. Caldwell recognized the type. Special Forces. Maybe intelligence. The man met his gaze and gave a slight nod. "General." Caldwell stopped a few feet away. "Who are you?" The man glanced around, then spoke in a low voice. "I don't have much time. The people you're dealing with this airline," he exhaled sharply. "They're part of something bigger." Caldwell crossed his arms. "Bigger than racial discrimination." The man shook his head. "This isn't just about keeping certain passengers off first class. It's about data collection, surveillance, targeting." Caldwell narrowed his eyes. "Explain." The man pulled out a flash drive from his pocket and pressed it into Caldwell's hand. "This contains everything," he said. "Passenger tracking, political profiling, connections to private security firms and government contracts. They've been collecting biometric data on high-profile individuals under the guise of random security checks." Caldwell's grip tightened around the flash drive. "Who's behind this?" The man glanced toward the far end of the terminal. "Where to?" Airport security officers had started moving in their direction. "They know I'm talking to you," he muttered. "I have to go." "Wait," Caldwell said. "Who are you?" The man hesitated. Then, in a whisper, he said, "You knew me as Lieutenant Daniel Voss." Fallujah, 2004. Caldwell's breath caught. Voss was dead. At least, that's what the reports had said. Killed in action. MIA with no remains recovered. Yet here he was. Before Caldwell could react, Voss turned and disappeared into the crowd, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. The security officers picked up their pace, eyes scanning for their missing target. Caldwell pocketed the flash drive and walked casually toward a nearby seating area, blending in with the travelers. Years of fieldwork had taught him how to evade pursuit without looking like he was running. His mind raced. Data collection, targeting, missing soldiers turning up alive. This was no longer just about an airline's discriminatory practices. This was about control. He needed to get back to Evelyn. As he retraced his steps toward gate 42, his phone buzzed again. Another message. "They're on to you. You need to leave the airport. Now." Caldwell's jaw clenched. Leaving meant losing the public pressure they had just built against the airline. But staying meant walking straight into a trap. And then another announcement. "Attention passengers. Due to operational concerns, Flight 209 has been canceled. Please proceed to customer service for rebooking." The tension in the terminal snapped. Passengers groaned, arguments broke out, and security personnel moved swiftly toward the gates. Caldwell knew exactly what had happened. The airline had just pulled the plug on the flight to bury the controversy. He reached Evelyn, who was already furious. "They think canceling the flight makes this go away," she snapped. Caldwell exhaled. "It means they're scared." She frowned. "What now?" He glanced around, lowering his voice. "We take this fight where they don't control the rules." Evelyn's eyes flicked toward the cameras, still rolling. Reporters. Passengers with their phones up. She grinned. "You're thinking press conference." Caldwell nodded. "And I have something they won't be able to ignore." He patted the flash drive in his pocket. This wasn't just about discrimination anymore. It was about exposing the machine behind it. And he was ready for war. The airline thought it could kill the controversy by canceling the flight. It had made one crucial mistake. General Marcus J. Caldwell wasn't just any passenger. He was a warrior. And if there was one thing he knew how to do, it was turn the battlefield to his advantage. Standing in the middle of the crowded terminal, surrounded by angry passengers and rolling cameras, Caldwell turned to Evelyn Carter. "You still got that old drill sergeant voice in you?" he asked. Evelyn smirked. "You have no idea." She stepped forward, raising her voice like a commander rallying troops. "Attention, everyone. This airline just tried to sweep this under the rug, but we're not letting them get away with it." People turned. Phones went up. The momentum shifted. Caldwell pulled out his phone and tapped a single button forward. The leaked email, the discriminatory policy, and every piece of damning evidence he had was now in the inboxes of every major news outlet in the country. Within seconds, his phone started vibrating with responses. CNN, NBC, The Washington Post. Reporters rushed forward, pushing through the crowd. Microphones, cameras, questions flying. "General Caldwell, what exactly happened here? Is it true this airline has been secretly profiling passengers? Did they target you because of your race?" Caldwell raised a hand, commanding silence. Then he spoke. "I have served this country for over 40 years, he said, his voice calm, but unshakable. "I've fought in wars. I've led soldiers into battle. And today I stand here because I was denied service not for anything I did, but because of who I am." The crowd murmured in anger. Reporters scribbled furiously. "This isn't just about me," Caldwell continued. "This is about systemic discrimination, a policy designed to remove certain people from first-class seating without them ever knowing why. It's not about rules. It's about control." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the flash drive. "What you're looking at," he said, holding it up for the cameras, "is proof. Not just of racial discrimination, but something even bigger. An organized data collection operation targeting high-profile individuals." The reporters leaned in. "What do you mean by data collection, General?" one journalist asked. Caldwell's expression darkened. Certain passengers, military officers, political figures, influential voices were being flagged. Their biometric data, travel patterns, and private information were being collected under the guise of security checks. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. "This airline isn't just profiling passengers," Caldwell said. "They're selling that data to third parties." A woman in a business suit suddenly appeared behind the reporters. Laura Mitchell. Her face was pale. She had just realized they had lost control of the narrative. "General," she said, stepping forward, forcing a smile. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." Caldwell didn't even look at her. "I think we've had enough of private conversations," he said. The cameras zoomed in on Mitchell's face. She swallowed hard. Then chaos. More security arrived, moving toward Caldwell like they were about to shut him down. Then came the second mistake. A guard reached for Caldwell's arm. Instantly, every veteran in the terminal moved. Evelyn Carter shoved the guard's hand away. "You do not touch my general." Another soldier, an older Marine in a baseball cap, stepped forward. "Try it and see what happens." Security hesitated. They were outnumbered. And then Caldwell's phone rang. A number he recognized. The entire crowd fell silent as he answered. "General Caldwell," came the voice. Deep, commanding. A man who could only be in one place. The Pentagon. Sir, Caldwell said. We've received your evidence, the voice said. This situation is now a matter of national security. Stay where you are. We're handling it. Caldwell turned, looking straight at Laura Mitchell. Her face was ashen. She knew exactly what that meant. This wasn't just a PR disaster anymore. This was an act of espionage. And the government was about to get involved. Understood, Caldwell said into the phone. I'll stay put. He hung up, slipping his phone back into his pocket. Then he met Mitchell's eyes. Looks like your bosses just got a new problem. Before she could respond, a new announcement came over the airport speakers. Attention! Effective immediately, all operations for this airline are under federal review. Passengers, please stand by. The crowd exploded in cheers. The airline had just been grounded. Caldwell exhaled. The battle wasn't over, but he had just turned the tide. And he wasn't stopping until the entire corrupt machine came crashing down. The airport was now a war zone of information. The airline's operations had been officially grounded under federal review. News cameras were rolling nonstop, and the crowd had transformed into something more than just angry passengers. They were witnesses. General Marcus J. Caldwell had done his part. He had made sure the world knew the truth. But now came the next phase of the battle, the one fought in the shadows. He stood near the terminal windows, his reflection mirroring the calm, disciplined face he had perfected over decades of service. But inside, his mind was a battlefield. The flash drive in his pocket was proof that this wasn't just about an airline, it was about a systemic operation. If the Pentagon was involved now, that meant this was bigger than corporate greed. This was national security. A familiar voice pulled him from his thoughts. We need to talk, Evelyn Carter said, stepping beside him. I just got a call from someone I trust. He says this goes even higher than we thought. Caldwell turned to her. How high? Evelyn's expression hardened. Government contracts. Black budget projects. This airline has been feeding passenger data into a private security, Firm 1. That doesn't officially exist. Caldwell's jaw tightened. He had seen this playbook before. Private security firms with shadowy government ties. Data collection under the guise of public safety. High-ranking officials profiting off information that should have been protected. And now, someone was orchestrating it all from behind the scenes. A puppet master. Caldwell exhaled. We need name. Evelyn nodded. Already working on it. But we might not have to dig too deep. Because someone wants to meet you. Caldwell narrowed his eyes. Who? Evelyn hesitated. He wouldn't say his name. Just that he's been waiting for you to figure this out. Caldwell had spent decades dealing with ghosts, figures who pulled strings from the shadows. He knew the type. Powerful enough to stay hidden. Careless enough to think they were untouchable. He slipped the flash drive from his pocket. Where's the meeting? Evelyn handed him a piece of paper. A location. A time. Caldwell read it. Then he looked up. This isn't just a meeting. Evelyn nodded. It's a trap. 1 hour later, Caldwell walked through the underground parking structure of the airport's security offices. The location was deliberately chosen out of public view, away from cameras. He was alone. No press. No backup. Because whoever wanted to talk to him didn't want an audience. A black SUV idled in the dimly lit space. Its tinted windows revealed nothing. Then the door opened. A man stepped out, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his shoes polished. The kind of man who didn't just work for power, he was power. Caldwell knew him instantly. Senator Richard Hawthorne, a man who had spent years on military committees, overseeing defense contracts and intelligence operations. A man with too many connections to be clean. Hawthorne smiled. General Caldwell, I was wondering how long it would take you to start asking the right questions. Caldwell didn't waste time. You're the one behind this. The senator chuckled. Behind what exactly? Caldwell took a step forward. The airline's profiling system. The data collection. The black budget security firm you're funneling information to. He tapped his pocket, where the flash drive rested. I have proof. Hawthorne's smile didn't fade. You have fragments, he corrected. Enough to stir up noise. Enough to make people angry. But not enough to stop it. Caldwell's fists clenched. Hawthorne took a slow step closer. You're a smart man, General. You know how these things work. There's no shutting it down. There's only controlling it. Caldwell's voice dropped to a lethal calm. You're running surveillance operations on American citizens. Hawthorne sighed. Oh, come now. Let's not act like this is new. We've been collecting data for decades. What do you think intelligence is built on? Patriotism. Caldwell didn't blink. I think it's built on duty, on protecting people, not exploiting them. Hawthorne's eyes darkened. You really think the government isn't in on this? You think the Pentagon doesn't already know? Caldwell's gut tightened. Hawthorne chuckled. They called you, didn't they? He smirked. Told you to stay put while they handled it. Caldwell stayed silent. Hawthorne nodded. That's because they already knew. They just didn't expect you to make it public. Caldwell processed the weight of it. The Pentagon hadn't been surprised by the evidence. They had been surprised it got out. You think you've won something here, General? Hawthorne continued. You're a symbol now. A trending story. But in a few weeks, people will move on. The system will keep running, and you'll be nothing more than an old soldier shouting into the void. Caldwell's blood burned. Hawthorne took a step closer, voice dropping. Or you could be part of it. Caldwell froze. Help me steer this, Hawthorne said smoothly. You don't have to like the game to play it, but you can play it better than anyone. Caldwell's pulse pounded. This wasn't just corruption. It was recruitment. A test. A temptation. Hawthorne studied him. So, what's it going to be, General? Caldwell's hands curled into fists. His decision was already made. But Hawthorne had made a critical mistake. Because he had underestimated the wrong soldier. Caldwell took a slow breath. Then he smiled. And Hawthorne's own confidence faltered. Because he realized he had just walked into his own trap. Senator Richard Hawthorne was a man used to control. He dictated the terms. He pulled the strings. But at this moment, as he stood face to face with General Marcus J. Caldwell, something in his carefully curated world was beginning to slip. Because Caldwell was smiling, not in amusement, not in surrender, but in the way a soldier smiles before delivering the final blow. You think this is a negotiation, Caldwell said, his voice steady, that I came here to hear your offer. Hawthorne adjusted his suit, masking his unease. I think you understand reality. And reality is, you're done, Caldwell interrupted. The senator's eyes flickered. Excuse me. Caldwell reached into his pocket, not for the flash drive, but for his phone. He turned the screen toward Hawthorne. A live broadcast was streaming. CNN, NBC, Fox News. Dozens of independent journalists. All of them watching. All of them listening. Hawthorne's confident facade cracked. Caldwell let the silence stretch. Let the weight of exposure settle into the senator's chest like a cold blade. Did you really think I'd come here alone? Caldwell said, his voice measured. Did you think I wouldn't control the battlefield? The truth landed hard. Hawthorne's usual smirk vanished. He had walked straight into a trap. Somewhere above them, inside the terminal, Evelyn Carter and a team of former military personnel were broadcasting everything. They had been recording the moment Hawthorne stepped out of the SUV. His confession, his arrogance, his admission that the Pentagon was complicit. This wasn't just a scandal anymore. This was treason. Hawthorne's breathing grew shallow. You have no idea what you've just done, he whispered. Oh, I do, Caldwell said. I just shattered your little empire. The senator's nostrils flared. His mind was racing. Damage control. Power plays. How could he spin this? How could he regain control? Caldwell didn't give him the chance. He turned his phone toward Hawthorne, revealing the Pentagon's official response. A bold statement from the Secretary of Defense. Effective immediately, an independent investigation has been launched into domestic surveillance programs involving unauthorized data collection by private security firms. Any government officials found complicit will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Hawthorne's face turned pale. Caldwell watched as the senator finally understood. This wasn't containable. This wasn't something he could buy his way out of. This was over. The senator exhaled sharply, straightening his tie in a last attempt to reclaim his dignity. "You think this ends with me?" he muttered. "You think I'm the top of the chain?" Caldwell held his gaze. "I think you were sloppy." Hawthorne's hands curled into fists. "You have no idea what's coming next." Caldwell stepped closer, voice low and deadly. "Neither do you." Then sirens. From a far end of the parking structure, black SUVs rolled in. The doors swung open, and federal agents poured out. Hawthorne stiffened. Senator Richard Hawthorne, one of the agents, called, his badge gleaming under the dim lights. "You are under federal investigation for conspiracy, abuse of power, and unauthorized surveillance operations." Hawthorne turned to Caldwell, pure hatred in his eyes. "You think this is a victory?" he hissed. Caldwell exhaled slowly. "I think it's a start." The agents moved in. Handcuffs clicked into place. Hawthorne was escorted to the waiting SUVs, his fall from power now public, undeniable, irreversible. Caldwell stood still for a moment, watching him go. Then his phone buzzed. A message. "Unknown number. Nice move, General. But this game isn't over." Caldwell's grip tightened. The shadows weren't done with him yet. But that was fine. Neither was he. The airport was still buzzing with tension, but the battle was won. Senator Richard Hawthorne had been taken into custody. The airline was in full shutdown mode, and the entire scandal had exploded into a nationwide firestorm. But General Marcus J. Caldwell knew better than to celebrate too soon. Because wars don't end with one victory. They end when the enemy is completely dismantled. He glanced down at his phone. The anonymous message still glowed on the screen. "Nice move, General. But this game isn't over." Caldwell exhaled slowly. Someone else was still watching. Someone higher than Hawthorne. A puppet master behind the puppet master. A movement caught his eye. Evelyn Carter was approaching, flanked by several of the veterans who had rallied behind them earlier. She held up her own phone, her face grim. "We have a problem," she said. Caldwell nodded. "We always do. What is it this time?" Evelyn handed him the phone. "Take a look at this." On the screen was a news update. Breaking. Unnamed government source reveals private security firms still operating beyond investigation's reach. Caldwell's jaw tightened. He scrolled down and found something worse. Hawthorne wasn't the only one involved. There were at least 3 more senators with financial ties to the same shadow program. And worse, the private security firm itself had gone dark. No official address. No listed employees. Just a shell corporation. "Damn it," Caldwell muttered. "They're already covering their tracks." Evelyn crossed her arms. "We expected this." Caldwell nodded. "Yeah, but we didn't expect them to escalate this fast." Evelyn took the phone back. "So what's next?" Caldwell glanced toward the news cameras still rolling. The press conference had ended, but the media was still hungry for more. And that was his greatest weapon. "We go public again," Caldwell said. "We don't let this slip into government bureaucracy where they can bury it." Evelyn nodded. "Full exposure?" Caldwell's expression hardened. "We take it as high as it can go." An hour later, Caldwell sat in a private airport lounge, his phone pressed to his ear. On the other end was a voice he recognized immediately. The President of the United States. "General." The President's voice was measured, but Caldwell could hear the underlying tension. "You've caused quite a storm today." Caldwell didn't blink. "Sir, I didn't cause this. I just made sure people saw it." A long pause. Then, a sigh. "You realize what you're up against?" the President asked. "This isn't just one bad senator. This is a machine that's been running for decades." Caldwell's grip tightened on the phone. "Then it's time to dismantle it." Another pause. Then, the President said something Caldwell hadn't expected. "I'm authorizing a full-scale task force investigation," he said. "You'll be given clearance to assist." Caldwell straightened. "Assist." A hint of a smile entered the President's voice. "I know you, Marcus. You don't follow orders anymore. You make things happen. Caldwell exhaled. He hadn't planned for this. He had assumed he'd have to fight from the outside. But now he had a direct line to dismantle the operation from within. "Sir," Caldwell said, his voice firm, "if we do this, we don't stop until we reach the top." The president's voice darkened. "Agreed." Caldwell ended the call and looked up. Evelyn was watching him. "Well," Caldwell stood, "we just got a green light to take this further than we ever expected." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "That's the good news. What's the bad news?" Caldwell's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "You think you've won, General? You've only started a war you can't finish." Caldwell's pulse stayed steady. He typed back a single response. "I've been finishing wars my whole life. See you soon." Then he turned to Evelyn. "We're going hunting." General Marcus J. Caldwell had spent his entire life on battlefields, some physical, some political. But this was a war fought in the shadows. And now he had been given something rare, a license to go hunting. The president's approval meant one thing: Caldwell wasn't just exposing corruption anymore. He was leading the charge against it. But the enemy knew he was coming, and they were preparing. Caldwell and Evelyn Carter sat inside a secure government facility, a temporary command center set up after the airport scandal exploded. Multiple monitors flickered with classified data, intelligence reports, and financial records tracing the private security firm behind the illegal surveillance operation. The task force investigation was already underway. But Caldwell wasn't about to wait for bureaucratic red tape to slow him down. "We need to hit them before they disappear," he said, scanning the screen. "If we don't move now, they'll be ghosts by morning." Evelyn nodded. "We have a target." She pointed at the lead shell corporation connected to the Operation Egis Global Security. On the surface, Egis was just another defense contractor, a name buried among hundreds of firms doing government work. But beneath the paperwork, they were the hub of everything. They had been funding the airline's passenger tracking system. They had been buying biometric data from TSA security checks. They had been feeding classified information to unknown third parties. And now, their corporate headquarters was under emergency restructuring, a fancy term for destroying evidence. "We move tonight," Caldwell said. Evelyn frowned. "You know this won't be easy." Caldwell smirked. "If it were easy, they wouldn't need us." Hours later, Caldwell and his team arrived at an undisclosed location in Virginia, a sleek corporate building that looked ordinary from the outside, but housed some of the darkest secrets in national security. The task force agents moved in first, sweeping the perimeter. Silent, efficient, military precision. Caldwell and Evelyn followed, stepping through the front entrance. The moment they walked in, the air changed. The lobby was empty. Too empty. Desks abandoned. Computers powered down. "Something's wrong," Evelyn murmured. Caldwell agreed. This wasn't a last-minute evacuation. This was a controlled retreat. They had known he was coming. Then, a single monitor in the room flickered on. A video feed. And on the screen, Senator Richard Hawthorne. Not from a prison cell, but from a private office. Caldwell's blood went cold. "Hello, General," Hawthorne said, his voice smooth, arrogant. "Did you really think this was over?" Caldwell didn't flinch. "I thought you'd be in custody." Hawthorne smirked. "You think a few agents and a press conference could hold me? Do you even understand what you're up against?" The door behind them locked automatically. Evelyn reached for her gun. "This is a trap." Caldwell stayed calm. "No. This is a message." Hawthorne leaned forward on the screen. "You wanted to hunt? You wanted to go after the machine? Well, now the machine is coming after you." Caldwell's fists clenched. "You're a traitor." Hawthorne chuckled. "No, General. I'm the future. You? You're just an old soldier who doesn't know when to quit." The screen cut to black. Then the building's security alarm triggered. A countdown timer appeared on the walls. 0:30, 0:29, 0:28, move. Caldwell barked. The team rushed out, storming through the halls as the system initiated a full purge. Files were being wiped. Servers melted down. Every piece of evidence inside was disappearing. By the time they reached the exit, the entire building was locked down. Then an explosion rocked the facility. Caldwell and his team barely made it clear before. The entire structure was engulfed in flames. Egis Global Security was gone. Hawthorne had just erased every trace of their crimes. Caldwell stared at the burning wreckage, his mind racing. This wasn't just about corruption. This was a full-scale war. And the enemy was already one step ahead. Back at the command center, Caldwell stood before the Pentagon liaison. "They burned everything," the agent said. "We lost every lead." Caldwell exhaled. Not every lead. Because he still had one card left to play. The anonymous messages. Someone inside the machine was feeding him information. Someone who wanted Hawthorne and his people to fall. And now, it was time to flush them out. Caldwell pulled out his phone. One final message to the unknown sender. "You still out there?" A moment of silence. Then a reply. "Yes. But you need to move fast. You're already marked." Caldwell's expression hardened. They thought they could scare him off. They thought they could erase the truth. They were wrong. He turned to Evelyn. "We're not playing defense anymore." She smirked. "What's the plan?" Caldwell's voice was ice cold. "We take the fight to them." General Marcus J. Caldwell had spent decades fighting battles in the open. But this war? This war was in the dark. Egis Global Security was gone, reduced to ash and silence. Every lead had been erased, and the men behind at Hawthorne and whoever was pulling his strings were already moving on to their next phase. But Caldwell wasn't going to let them disappear. Because while they had been burning evidence, Caldwell had been collecting something far more valuable. Names, patterns, weak points. And now, it was time to strike back. Inside a secure government black site, Caldwell and Evelyn Carter stood over a large digital map, a network of connections stretching across corporations, military contractors, and government agencies that weren't supposed to exist. "Everything we thought we knew was just the tip of the iceberg," Evelyn muttered, scrolling through the data. "This operation isn't about surveillance anymore." Caldwell nodded. "It's about control." The Pentagon's task force had worked fast, but bureaucracy was too slow. The government wanted more time to investigate. Caldwell knew they didn't have time, because the real enemy was already planning their next move. And then his phone vibrated. The anonymous contact. "You have one shot at this, General. Hawthorne isn't the top. You need to go after the real architect." Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "The real architect?" He texted back. "Give me a name." A long pause. Then a single word. "Langley." Evelyn's eyes widened. "The CIA?" Caldwell exhaled slowly. It made sense. Egis Global had been too clean. The kind of operation that only survived because it had government protection. And now they knew exactly where to hit. 2 nights later, Caldwell and Evelyn stood in the shadows outside a private estate deep in Virginia. This wasn't just any house. This was a safe house, the kind that didn't exist on any government registry. Inside, the man who had been running the entire operation from the beginning. The real architect. Director Martin Crowe, CIA Intelligence Director. The man who had been funding Egis Global. The man who had been pulling Hawthorne's strings the entire time. If they took him down, the entire machine would collapse. Caldwell checked his watch. 1 o'clock hours. Time to move. They entered silently, efficiently. The guards outside? Taken out without a sound. Inside, the house was sleek, modern, cold. Exactly the kind of place a high-ranking intelligence officer would operate from. Caldwell found Crowe in his study, seated behind a polished wooden desk, sipping scotch. He didn't look surprised. "I was wondering when you'd come," Crowe said smoothly, setting his glass down. "But I expected you sooner." Caldwell stepped forward. "You've been running this game for a long time, haven't you?" Crowe smirked. "Longer than you've been trying to stop it." Evelyn moved behind Caldwell, weapon raised. "You built Egis Global. You turned national security into a for-profit empire. Crow sighed. National security? No, dear. We built national dominance. He leaned forward. You think this ends with me? You think you've won something here? Caldwell stared at him, unmoved, unshaken. You're done. Crow chuckled. Am I? Then he pressed something under his desk. Instantly, a security alert triggered. Alarms blared. Floodlights outside flashed. Teams of armed men were moving in. Evelyn cursed. We need to move now. But Caldwell didn't flinch, because he had already accounted for this. Actually, he said, pulling out his phone, you just walked into my trap. He pressed a button, and suddenly Crow's monitors lit up. Live broadcasts, news channels, the Pentagon, the White House, every major intelligence committee in the country. Crow's expression froze. Caldwell smirked. Say hello to the world. The entire conversation had been broadcasted. Everything, his confessions, his arrogance, his corruption, was now public knowledge. There was no shutting this down. There was no erasing it. Crow stood slowly, his entire world collapsing around him. You don't know what you've done. Caldwell tilted his head. I think I do. The doors burst open. Federal agents swarmed the room. Crow's face went pale as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Caldwell leaned in. You spent your whole life controlling people, manipulating governments, hiding in the dark. He gestured to the cameras. Now the whole world sees you. Crow exhaled, his arrogance crumbling. And then, as the agents led him away, he whispered something. Something only Caldwell could hear. There's always another. Caldwell watched him go, the words lingering. He knew the truth. One battle was over. But the war? The war would never end. 3 weeks later, Caldwell sat in his office, sipping coffee as he read the morning headlines. National surveillance operation exposed, CIA director arrested. The machine had been shattered. The people who thought they were untouchable had been brought to their knees. And yet Caldwell knew better than to relax. Because, as he set his mug down, his phone buzzed. Another anonymous message. You did well, General. But there's more you don't see. Caldwell exhaled. Of course there was. He typed back a response. Then let's finish the job. The message disappeared. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp. The world had changed. But his mission? His mission was just beginning. The battle may be over, but the war against corruption never truly ends. What do you think? If this were real, how far would the conspiracy go? And more importantly, who else might still be in the shadows, pulling the strings? Let me know where in the world you're watching from. Drop your country or city in the comments. And if you want more stories filled with action, twists, and high-stakes drama, don't forget to subscribe. Because trust me, this is just the beginning. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more.